making the end caps to fit has always been a challenging problem. The issue is that, you know, if you do it the way the jacks do, or a natural way, would be to cut sort of a parabola in fabric and then sew this edge right along with the hammock edge that's curving up, and this would be the width of the spreader bar, like so. Now, the challenge is in laying out this curve and cutting it and binding it to the body just right so that this arc length is exactly the width of the hammock so that it matches. And my sewing skills, my cutting skills, always leave a bit to be desired right up here in the corners. I'm a bit off. So what I evolved was a means by which I could be more exact in fitting this edge to the hammock body. So the approach is to realize that if I took a rectangle of fabric like so and had this be the width from the spreader bars and have cut the width of the rectangle so that this length right here is exactly the arc length that I want on this right here, then if somehow I can turn this into an end cap by cutting a big dart, then I could accomplish what it is that I want. So what do I mean by a big dart? It means that I would take that same piece of fabric and cut a big indent like so, and the critical bit being that the length of this side be exactly equal to the length of that side so that they come together. So if I can do that, and of course I have done that, and I've taken this, and I've folded the edges up, and I've taped them together, and this then becomes the end cap. So this is where the spreader bar is. This is the edge that's bound to the hammock, exactly the width that I need it to be, because it's the width of a rectangle, which is easy to do, and then I can sew this edge to the body, and then I'm done. So the challenge then is, how do I do that? In particular, how do I arrange so that the length of this edge is exactly the length of that edge? And the way that I do that is to fold the paper over and make one cut. I'll take my rectangle here, and this is the spreader bar edge, and I'll take this corner and I'll fold it up to where I want it to match, like so. And then, having the fabric doubled over, then I will measure the length of the cut that I want to make through both sides, like so, fasten things down, and then cut right on through. Do the same thing on the other side, which will bring me to this, which will bring me to this after I bind the edges. So that's what's about to go on, only in fabric. So the next task is to measure the width that we actually have between the cut ends. We cut the corners off, and now we're going to fit the end caps to that. So I can see that this end is exactly 43 inches, and so next I'll cut an end cap that will match that. So I'm going to make the end caps out of 1.1 nylon. So I've marked off a rectangle here. One side is 43 inches, which is just exactly what it needs to be to mate to the hammock. And the other side is 17.5 inches, which is going to be the depth of the end cap. I've used a T-square, and then you can actually see that it's possible to write on that black fabric with a black pen and have it mark. The far edge of the cut rectangle is going to mate to the body of the hammock. The near edge here is going to be at the top edge near the spreader bar. That's going to be shorter than the far edge, and I have to figure out just how far. So I'm going to take the width that was cut at 43 inches. I'm going to have a 46-inch spreader bar. When I'm sewing up the end cap at that end, I'm going to leave ½ inch of allowance. So that gives me the difference that I have to cut away. I want to cut away the same amount on both sides, so I'll divide by 2, and that means that I'm going to have 8¼ inches to cut in on both these sides. And so I'm going to mark this fabric here and at the same distance on the other side, and then start to do the adjustment. I folded the far corner over now and brought the edge of it right to that part, that 8¼ inches that I marked off before, being important that I bring this edge there rather than this edge. This edge right here is going to be sewn to the hammock body, and so I need to leave a little allowance there. So I'm going to cut a dart to remove the excess fabric. I've done this by putting the edge of the T-square here at the 8¼ inches, and then found the point where 14 inches intersects with this fold. Why 14 inches? Just determined that by experimenting once upon a time. what I'm going to do then is I'm going to run a stitch along here and then cut away the rest of this, and that will create a great big dart that'll do just exactly what I need to do. So before I run that stitch, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark where I want that stitch, and then I'll just mark that comme ça. And next then I will take pins, and I will start to pin the fabric on both sides of that line to keep the fabric in place as I go about sewing that. So I haven't got any kind of slippage when I do that. It doesn't take very long. Just enough to keep things straight, and then I can go to the sewing machine. Now I do want to make particular care to make this straight. I want a straight line cut, so I want a straight line stitch as well. You can do that is just apply a little tension and let the dogs do their thing. So I've put down a straight line to follow. I think I might sew right through my fingers doing that. With the straight line, it makes it possible to hope that you have a straight stitch. All the way to the top, back stitch, and here we are. So I was pretty successful in getting a straight line stitch. Put it out on my cutting board here, lined it up on the number 10 line. Bring my straight edge. I want to snug the straight edge up pretty close to the stitch. I want to cut close to the stitch. I'm going to hide the stitch, and then I'm going to cut away this portion. I'm going to anchor the straight edge with a knee so it doesn't slide. And I hold pressure down on the straight edge. And I have a nick in this rotor wheel. It doesn't cut completely the first time. So 2 or 3 times, and then it'll cut away very nicely. So now perhaps we can see what I was talking about. And this is the beginning of a cap. Now we can see that the form of the end cap has taken shape. However, this seam we've cut is raw. We want to hide that edge, and I'll hide that edge by doubling it over and sewing another line like so, and that will hide the unfinished edge, and then we'll have a little finished seam on one side. That'll be on the inside, and we'll have a very nice looking seam like that on the outside. Now when we're encasing the seam, we want to be sure that it's completely encased and doesn't have little bits sticking out on the other side. So I have discovered it's worth the effort to pin the fabric down before doing the stitching, and then to have a good allowance. It might be 1/4 of an inch or so. I stitch along to make sure that the raw edge is completely covered. The raw edge is nicely hidden now due to that extra seam. This bit will go on the inside. So we'll have a little seam like that on the inside. This very nice finished piece will be on the outside. The last step before attaching to the body is we'll go to the top edge near the spreader bar. I'm going to finish this rough edge putting some bias tape on it. Finished with the end cap. This is at the foot end. You can see it's all end cap-ish in shape. This will be the top where the spreader bar goes. This will be the edge that gets sewn along the hammock body. When we roll the webbing in the hammock, we're going to roll it to the inside, which means that the edge that we're looking at, or here, the side we're looking at here, is the outside of the hammock. I'm going to, when I sew it, I'm going to align the edge of the end cap with the body. Then I'm going to finish this off with some bias tape, and I want the bias tape to be on the inside of the hammock. So to make that all work, if this is the outside then when I align the end cap with the body, I'm going to do it with the inside of the end cap. I'll be pinning it along this edge, and then when I finish it all off and then I flip this around and over, then I'll have the outside matching the outside here. So that's just a little bit of topology that we have to be aware of. So since the end cap was cut to be exactly the same width along this edge as the hammock body is from that cut corner to the cut corner on the other side, I should just be able to pin it down and it should just fit. That's in theory. Reap the benefit now of end cap design, because after the end cap was made, just a matter of pinning it along the edge of the hammock and sawing it. That's leaving a rough edge that we're going to cover over with some bias tape. In doing that, one chooses which side of the bias tape you sew down first. I'm going to do that on the hammock side, and the reason for that is that when you do that, you sew down the bias tape open like that, and then you finish it off, you fold it over. In the folding over, I would like to be able to enclose the raw edge of the other bias tape that we put on the top edge of the end cap, just to finish it off nicely. So here, see, I've started to pin the bias tape, again on the gray hammock side. Something to note is that I've started the bias tape up here where the webbing will roll. So the webbing will roll over that. This makes it a nice finish. Something to be aware of, I have learned from experience, is that if one's sewing this bias tape along like so, it's difficult to see what's happening underneath, and so it's good to get things pinned up out of the way, because they will fold and you will have to do some ripping. So I hope I don't have to do that. I've used bias tape now on the seam between the end cap and the hammock body. That's this piece right here. We folded it over and closed it over the bias tape that's going to go along the top of the end cap. This is the seam for the dart that's in the end cap, and that's going to be on the inside. We brought the bias tape, the binding of the end cap to body, all the way to the top of the edge here, and we are now in position where we will start to roll the webbing, and we will roll it over the top of this. We'll roll it twice, once, and then a second time we'll hide that raw edge. And then we're going to pin it down so that we don't have any bunching. Try to get the webbing up tight in the fabric so we're not having any loose fabric. And I'm going to pin it on the far side. If I pin it on the far side, then the fabric will stay in position on the webbing and will be pinned down a little bit. So it's a matter of going, I don't know, every 3-4 inches or so, tightening it up and putting in a pin. We'll start the sewing. We're going to end up doing 2 lines of stitching along the webbing. The first line I'm going to do right along this edge to bind it. I want to get it started, so I hope that you can see that we have out on maybe 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch, something like that on that edge. I can keep it aligned by looking at this edge with relation to some of these lines right here. Another point that's interesting is that I've started this stitch not up here where the webbing is doubled, because that turns out to be a little difficult. So I want to do that by hand. So I'm going to just do the stitching along the main portion of the webbing, and then come back to that. Got a nice single line of stitching now. Taken out all the pins, and now I'll run a second stitch along the top edge. And we'll be done this side. The end caps are sewn in, the webbing is rolled and sewn down. Double body hammock. This package comes in at 14 ounces so far. Next thing to do is to put on a name tag. I got a roll of these labels made relatively inexpensively. It's printed onto this fabric. We're at a point now where we should make a label, and I have taken to putting the label at the foot end of the hammock. So I'm going to do that before I put on the bug net. Here we go. Quality goes in before the name goes on.